Skills in Duel Links add an extra layer of deck building to the game, and is one of the biggest things that allows it to stand out from its TCG counterpart. Most of the best skills in the game are very specific towards certain decks and archetypes. So in this list, we'll be going over skills which are almost completely generic and can technically work with any deck. And at number 10, we have Draw Sense Spell / Trap. This skill has the effect where, each time your life points decrease by 1000 during the draw phase, instead of conducting your normal draw, you add a random spell trap from your deck to your hand instead. But you can only use this skill if your deck starts with 3 or more spell or traps with different names. So basically with this skill, if you're playing a deck that has 3 really good spells or traps, and you're fine with drawing any one of them, then this skill is an excellent tool for allowing you to get one of those cards in your hand pretty quickly if you're running a very monster heavy deck. And decreasing your life points by 1000 is not that difficult for most decks. And there's no once per duel on this skill, so theoretically you could proc this skill every single turn. Which is what Dark Lords did to a great extent, and definitely abused this skill much more than any other meta archetype was able to. You see, Dark Lords have this gimmick where they can copy the effect of one of their spell or traps in the graveyard by both paying 1000 life points and returning that card from their graveyard to their deck. So due to the life point cost requirement to copy the effect, they're able to proc this skill every turn. And due to them having to return the card back to the deck, you're going to have a spell or trap card to draw every turn with the skill. And they have 3 excellent cards to use with the skill. They have Dark Lord Contact, which allows them to special summon any Dark Lord monster from the graveyard. They have Sanctified Dark Lord, which is what their deck kind of revolves around, as it's the monster negate that also gains life points. And then they have Banishment of the Dark Lords, which allows them to search out anything they want. So literally all 3 of these spells / traps are excellent options to draw, and they get to recycle them every turn and guarantee that they draw into one of them by just doing their plays like normal. Thunder Dragons also use this skill occasionally, but for the most part it doesn't see a ton of competitive play, but it is very good at the decks that are able to take advantage of it. And it's a completely generic skill that everyone has access to, and there's like a million different characters who are able to learn it. And at number 9, we have Bandit. This is a skill only usable by Bandit Keith, although the skill is usable in pretty much any deck, so definitely falls into the generic category, as what it does is if your life points are below 1500, you can steal one of your opponent's set cards in their spell and trap card zone by returning 1 card from your hand to the deck, and this skill can only be used once per duel. Now, this is actually the nerfed version of the skill, as you used to be able to do it without returning a card from your hand to your deck, so it was a pure +2 in card economy, as you deny your opponent 1 of the resources, and then gain a resource at the same time. And if your opponent was playing a generic spell or trap card that you could actually use, then it was a huge benefit for you. Although it's heavily limited by the life point cost requirement, so there are very few decks that were actually able to use it reliably, but would still try because of that +2 in card advantage, which even after the nerf is still a +1 that allows you to reset Garnets back into your deck and acts as a skill version of MST, stealing one of your opponent's back row cards so they can't use it against you. But even with how good the effect actually is, having to be below 1500 life points means you can go a couple of duels without ever actually using the effect a single time. And at that point, you're better off just using one of the other generic skills that you can actually use every duel. So it's basically on this list for just having a really good potential as a generic skill, even if it's a little bit too hard to use regularly or reliably. And at number 8, we have Shadow Game. This is a skill which is only usable by Yami Merrick, which, just like the Bandit Keith skill, is completely generic and usable in every deck. Although it's only really useful in certain kinds of decks, mainly burn decks that are trying to stall out long enough to lower your opponent's life points to 0 by effect damage. As what this skill does is, at the end of the turn, your opponent will take damage to the life points equal to the number of cards in their graveyard times 100, up to a maximum of 400 life point damage. So as long as your opponent has 4 cards in their graveyard, then they're going to take 400 life point damage every turn until they get to 1000 life points or less, in which case the skill stops. And this skill also, unfortunately, affects the player who uses it as well. So you have to be sure to protect your own life points so that your opponent doesn't snipe you with that last 1000 points of damage, because chances are, while you're stalling out, you're going to have 4 cards in your graveyard as well. The original version of Shadow Game didn't have a cap on the amount of damage it could deal, and did not shut off when it was at 1000 or below, and was way more useful as a generic burn skill. Although even after they nerfed it, this version can still be useful. And at number 7, we have Labyrinth Builder. This is a skill which can only be used by the Paradox Brothers, and has the ability where you can shuffle 2 cards from your hand back into your deck in order to create a Labyrinth Wall on your side of the field. And this skill can only be used once per duel. Labyrinth Wall is a level 5 vanilla monster with 3000 defense, so basically this skill requires you to go -1 in order to get a huge wall on your side of the field, which can immediately be used for a tribute summon, or any other kind of play that requires a high-level monster on your side of the field. This is a pretty popular skill to use with Subterra decks, since they can combine it with Subterra Nemesis Warrior in order to tribute the high-level Labyrinth Wall on your side of the field, in order to bring out one of their high-level monsters from the deck. As Nemesis Warrior really needs high-level monsters to use its effect in order for it to function properly with all the high-level Subterras it can summon. And since it can only special summon them from the deck, this skill also works as a way of making sure they're in your deck so you can special summon them. This skill is also sometimes used with Gem Knight Block Dragon decks, since they use Labyrinth Wall as an Earth monster for Block Dragon, plus Block Dragon allows you to search out 3 cards when it's sent to the graveyard, which is normally a +2 anyway. But it can only search out 3 monsters if their levels add up to 8. So if you have some of your weird level rock monsters in your hand that you might not be able to get the full 3 search off of the effect, Labyrinth Builder can make sure you have those cards in your deck as well so that you can search them with Block Dragon. If you're searching out 3 cards with Block Dragon, then it doesn't really matter that you're returning 2 of them in order to activate Labyrinth Builder. It's also occasionally used with Dinosaurs and Dark Magician decks. It's a pretty decent generic skill that's usable in more decks than the previous one so far, but obviously not good in every single deck, because there's plenty of decks that don't care about having a level 5 vanilla monster on their side of the field, and can't afford to return 2 cards in their hand back to their deck, or just have a better skill to use. And at number 6, we have Grit. This skill has the effect where, if you have 4,000 or more life points at the start of a turn, then your life points will not fall below 1 for 1 time only. But then afterwards, you can only special summon 1 monster until the end of your next turn. And this skill can only be activated once per duel. So basically, this skill allows you to survive lethal damage once, but only if you took that lethal damage after start of the turn with 4,000 life points. So this skill is really good for allowing you to survive a whole turn without using any of your cards, which was really good for OTK decks that were trying to win in 1 turn anyway, which is why this skill was nerfed from its original version, which didn't have any restrictions on it. Even in its current nerfed version form, it's still incredibly useful, but only if you're playing a deck which only really special summons 1 time per turn normally anyway, like maybe an Archfiend Black Skull Dragon OTK deck, where you can only summon 1 time anyway due to the effects of Red Eyes Fusion. But it's also sometimes used in Witchcrafters and Dynamist decks. If you're trying to win in less than 3 turns and you don't want to play any form of protection or disruption at all, then Grit is a very valuable skill to have, if you're playing a deck that can afford to only special summon 1 time after the effect is proc. And at number 5, we have Life Point Boost Alpha. This skill is really simple in that it just increases your starting life points by 1,000. And there's no downside or something you have to activate to get it, you just always start with more life points than your opponent, unless they're also using a skill like this. And starting the game with 1,000 more life points is technically useful for pretty much every deck, and requires almost no strategy to use, while also being somewhat useful, because the average deck that tries to win in 1 turn usually only accounts for dealing 4,000 points of damage. So having an extra 1,000 could actually save you for 1 extra turn in some circumstances. But most of the people who use Life Point Boost Alpha use it because they gain some kind of benefit from it, or because they don't really have any other better skills to use. Arrow Mages, for example, have effects that only activate if they have more life points than their opponent, so Life Point Boost Alpha is an easy way for them to be the qualifications for their second effects. Even if it's not necessary most of the time, since their deck is all about gaining life points anyway, it would just allow them to use their second effects immediately at the start of the duel. For decks that play Desperado Barrel Dragon, they'll sometimes take Life Point Boost Alpha so they can use Card of the Soul in order to search it out, since Card of the Soul allows you to search out a card from your deck whose attack and defense adds up to equal to your life points, and Desperado Barrel Dragon's attack and defense add up to 5,000, and it's a really good boss monster that you definitely would want to search out. And at number 4, we have Extra Extra. This is a skill that can only be used by Maximilian Pegasus, and has the effect where, when your life points have decreased by 2,000, during your draw phase when you're about to draw a card, you get to draw an extra copy of that card, and this skill can only be used once per duel. So basically, you just gain a +1 in card advantage by doubling whatever your next draw is, which is usable by pretty much every single deck. Most of the skills that proc during your draw phase only allow you to search out very specific types of cards. This is one of the few which actually gives you advantage for reaching low life point values and waiting for your draw phase. There are others as well, but none of them are as generic as Extra Extra. And you would think that a skill that is literally a straight +1 in card advantage that can be procced even if you gain the life points back due to a battle in Boxer Veil, that it would see way more play. But actually, it rarely sees use. And that's mainly because the same conditions for proccing this skill are also the conditions for the number 1 spot on this list. And you'll kind of understand why most people decide to just play that over this generic skill if they get the chance to. Although I will say, Extra Extra used to be even better before it was nerfed, as it did not used to have a once per duel clause. So every time you lost 2,000 life points, you'd be able to draw an extra copy of your next card, which made some life point gain decks actually viable. And at number 3, we have Switcheroo. This is another skill which can only be used by Bandit Keith, just like Bandit, and this skill is completely generic, as what it does is if your life points have decreased by 1500 during the duel, you can return one card from your hand to your deck in order to draw one other card. And this skill can only be used once per duel. So basically, it allows you to mulligan one card without losing any card advantage, which is useful in pretty much every deck. There isn't really a deck that would not benefit from being able to use this effect, because of just how versatile the ability of resetting garnets and then trying for another draw is. Especially one as generic as this and easy to activate, unlike Bandit, which requires you to be below 1500 life points to reset a garnet generically. Although Switcheroo is not a +1 in card advantage, it's 100% just card neutral, so you don't gain any advantage for using the skill. Even so, the ability to mulligan one card is really powerful in Yu-Gi-Oh! To the point where most skills that allow you to do this generically are heavily nerfed, and there's almost no generic cards in the game that allow you to perform a similar feat without going -1. And Switcheroo is no exception, as this version of the skill is nerfed, as the original version could be used 2 times per duel and only required you to lose 1000 life points to activate. And the reason they nerfed the skill was because everybody was using it, and even in its nerfed state, it's still used occasionally. And at number 2, we have the Tie That Binds. This is a generic skill that's usable by a lot of different duelists and basically has the effect where, once per turn, you can just increase the attack of all of your face-up monsters on the field by 100 times the number of monsters you control until the end of the turn. So if you have 3 monsters on your side of the field, it will increase the attack of all of them by 300. But if you only have 1 monster on your side of the field, then it will only increase that one monster's attack by 100. So it's more useful the more monsters you have out. Although what's really good about this skill, and the reason it's the second most used generic skill in the game, is because of how easy it is to use, and extra attack points are just good for pretty much any deck. There is no requirement to using this skill. It works on every monster you control and doesn't require any kind of special game state, and can be used every single turn of the duel. Technically, the Bandit skill is a +1 in card advantage, but it's possible to go to a couple of duels without ever actually being able to use the skill because of its harsh activation requirement. Whereas with the Tie That Binds, you'll be using it multiple times in every single duel, and chances are it might actually be a game-winning effect sometimes. Like, for example, maybe you're using Gagaga Samurai to attack directly. Gagaga Samurai can attack twice with its effect, but it only has 1900 attack, so your opponent will usually survive with 200 life points left, unless you have the Tie That Binds, where you increase his attack by just 100 more, allowing for an actual OTK. Or maybe you're in a mirror match with the Blue Eyes against another Blue Eyes player, and all you need is 100 more attack for all of your Blue Eyes to attack over your opponent's 3000 walls. It's not a game-winning effect, you're not going to gain any card advantage with it, but it's easy to use and actually more useful than something like Life Point Boost Alpha, which also has the same benefits of being usable and useful in every duel. It's just allowing a boost of all your monsters' attack is more useful than having 1000 extra life points. And at number 1, we have Destiny Draw. This is a skill that can only be used by Yami Yugi and has the effect where, if your life points have decreased by 2000, during your next draw phase you get to search out any card from your deck instead of drawing a card. But this skill can only be used once per duel. Now, the ability to search out any card from your deck is useful in literally every single deck. In fact, that's a super good effect to have, kind of overpowered even. If your deck requires any kind of strategy to succeed, Destiny Draw will allow you to get the combo pieces you need exactly when you need it. And since so many decks are able to pop off from just having a handful of good cards in their hand, a very common strategy for a ton of meta decks is to just stall out until Destiny Draw is procced, in which case they can search out the card they need based on the cards they have in their hand in order to win on their next turn. And because Destiny Draw is so useful, you can kind of see why there's no reason to play extra when you can just search out any card from your deck for the same activation requirement. In fact, Destiny Draw is probably the most used skill in the game currently, and has been useful ever since the game first launched, where the skill worked pretty much exactly the same, except it wasn't once per duel. And there was also a bug where it wouldn't shuffle your deck afterwards, so you knew which card was on top of your deck. It's one of the few overpowered generic skills in the game that has avoided any heavy nerfs over this, mainly because there were a lot of other really good generic skills also running around, like pre-nerfed Switcheroo or Balance for example. But since they have been hitting all the other generic skills one after another over and over, Destiny Draw is definitely standing out, and will most likely be hit in the future at some point, so who knows, it will stay number 1 on this list. But as it is now, Destiny Draw is easily the best generic skill in the game, and makes Battling Boxeler Veil a very popular card because of it. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any other generic skills that should have definitely been in this video that I may have missed, or have ideas for any Duel Links related videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.